Wakeman, it's so beautiful to see you.
I want you to want me.
Hey out there, live music lovers. Welcome to episode number 31 of First Concert Memories, the monthly sidecast from your pals at the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock podcast, where we invite a guest on to talk about how seeing a concert live really changed their lives, or made for a great story, or solidified their love of rock music, or whatever the case may be. And today we have a really fun one. We had just a blast talking to Oliver Wakeman about seeing Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe play live. And for those of you who don't know Oliver is a very talented keyboardist, piano player, composer, songwriter. He's done many solo albums. He's toured with some great bands. He did a stint in Yes. And of course, his father, Rick, is a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because of his many stints in Yes. There are actually 5 separate stints in Yes, plus his time in Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe, and in Yes, featuring Anderson, Rabin, and Wakeman. And for listeners who don't know the story of Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe, essentially, Yes had become pretty pop-oriented by the late 80s. It kind of turned Jon Anderson off, and he wanted to kind of go back to the more original Yes style of the early 70s. And because Steve Howe had left to be in Asia in the early 80s, and Rick Wakeman had long been a solo artist, and Bill Bruford, who had left Yes in the 70s and was eventually in King Crimson and other bands, was available, they decided to put together a version of Yes. But they couldn't just use the Yes name necessarily, because Yes was an ongoing concern, and Chris Squire still retained the rights. So they made their debut album, Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe, in 1988, and then they did a very big tour, a tour of arenas, despite the fact that they were a brand new band. But they were essentially Yes without Chris Squire. And of course, they got the immortal Tony Levin to come in to play bass with them. Now, Oliver is a friend of the show. He's been on a couple of times before, and he has some fun stuff coming up. He's got a 20th anniversary reissue of an album called Mother's Ruin, which we're going to talk about here on the show. He's also doing his first ever tour with his father, Rick, of America here in the month of March. And so we asked him to come on and promote those two things, but also tell the story of the first time he saw Rick in a big stage with Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe. Because, as I said, Rick had a very prominent solo career, and he'd seen him play his solo shows with his band. But usually those are theaters, 2,000 to 3,000 people, somewhere in that. Now they're playing arenas. They're playing 15, 17, 20,000 people, and across America, which for a teenager, and we're about the same age, he might have been a year ahead of us in high school, this is a really mind-blowing time. Now, because we have some familiarity with Oliver, we kind of go off topic. It's not purely about just seeing Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe, but he does tell a story about how that tour and a subsequent mixing session for a single led to a stronger relationship with Steve Howe, which eventually led to them working together and his eventual tenure in Yes. And then we talked a lot about Yes and his time there. And then we just kind of talked about music in general. Honestly, Oliver is one of the most open and honest guests we've ever had. Of course, he's English, so he's very articulate. And he tells us stories about growing up, maybe not seeing his father as much as he would like, but eventually then discovering Yes music and Rick's music, and how this tour, ABWH, really turned him on in a new way to see just how big Rick really was. Because as he says, when you're in the bubble, you don't really realize what everyone's outside perception is of your father or the band that he's in. And then when you see it live at the Summit in Houston with 17,000 people, well, that's an eye-opening experience, and that's what we've asked Oliver to share with us here today. But first, we do have a little bit of business to take care of. We always like to mention we are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network, a family of over 100 different shows. You can learn more at pantheonpodcast.com or follow on socials at Pantheon Pods. And you know we love giving shout-outs to our intergalactic sponsor, RareVinyl.com, who is based in the UK, folks, but they ship all over the world, and they procure collections from all over the world. So if you want to get all those Rick Wakeman era Yes albums, you can find most all of them at rarevinyl.com. You might find first editions. You might find them in mint condition. You can find Oliver's stuff, his stuff with Yes, his solo stuff, really anything you're looking for. And then they gave us a code UGLY, UGLY, so at checkout, you can save 10% off one entire order. Now, that's not just one item, it's everything in your basket. So go get that first edition copy of Tales from Topographic Oceans. Go see if you can get a copy of Oliver's Anam Cara album. Maybe some of Rick's solo records like The Six Wives of Henry VIII or Journey to the Center of the Earth. Whatever it might be, buy them all. And then use Ugly to save 10% off all of them. So visit rarevinyl.com, use the code Ugly, save 10%. Your record collection will thank you. Now back to Oliver. Again, we really had a good time chatting with Oliver. We probably could have chatted with him for a few hours. He was very generous with his time. He's very generous with his stories and kind of gave an inside peek into his own family dynamics. We're not a psychiatric show here. We're a rock and roll show, so we don't dive too deep into that. But it's interesting just to hear what it was like to grow up the son of a legend and then carve your own road yourself, which eventually led you back to the band that he was once in. It was interesting and fun, and we can't wait to see Oliver with Rick in March in the UK. I'm going to see him in Cincinnati on March 22nd. And if you've never seen Rick or Oliver, I highly encourage you in America to come see that tour. So enough from me. Let's hear from Oliver Wakeman talking about seeing his dad Rick play in Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe in the late 80s. How have you been? How did 2025 wrap up for you?
Busy. Ridiculously busy, but good. It's just been very, very, very busy trying to get everything done. It's just been a bit crazy, really, but not going to complain. I've had periods in my life where I've not been busy, so I'm not going to complain about being busy.
Yeah, no. We got some great stuff coming up in 2026, it looks like.
Yeah, there's some other bits too, which I'll tell you about afterwards.
All right, very good. Well, thank you for joining us here on First Concert Memories, Oliver. We've really enjoyed speaking with you before over the years. I think you'll find this format, it's a little looser than kind of our normal Ugly American Werewolf in London, where we might be interviewing you regarding an upcoming release or something like that, like in the past we did with the John Wetton box set or your Anam Cara album.
Yeah.
But this is more about just kind of recalling an important time in your life and as it was related to rock and roll. And obviously we have musicians and fans on of bands, but it's probably the first time we've interviewed someone who was talking about seeing a band, or at least an offshoot of a band that they would eventually play in one day, and seeing their father in that band when you're of an age to be like, well, maybe that could be me one day. Wow. Very interesting. And of course, we're talking about Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe on their big tour. You might be able to see, if you look very closely, some ABWH and Rick-related stuff over here, but this is kind of what we're talking about here was this tour here.
That was it. Yeah, the evening of Yes Music Plus, yeah.
That's right. Now, can you tell us anything about how Rick came to be part of ABWH? I know that Jon had kind of become disenchanted with the direction of Yes, and Steve wasn't in the band, and obviously Rick wasn't in the band. So it made sense to, and Bill had been off doing King Crimson for a while, but now he had not been in that for a bit. So do you know how it all came together?
No.
No? Okay.
No, it's a bit of a, I'll probably go off topic a little bit.
That's fine.
My family history is a bit odd and unusual, because obviously Dad was well known when I was born. He was already playing with Yes.
That's right.
And then at the age of 5, my mum and dad had divorced, and my dad had moved to Switzerland. So I didn't see my dad for about 6 years or so. So he was in Switzerland, we were in the UK. And then when he got divorced for the second time, he moved back to the UK and met his soon-to-be third wife, who was very keen to try and meet myself and my brother.
Oh, good.
And start to pull the family together again. Because it's quite difficult to do that when one's in Switzerland and 2 kids, not even 10 are living in the UK. So we went over to Switzerland, I think, once or twice, but not very often. Anyway, so I only really sort of got to spend more time with Dad, probably when I was about 13 or so, 12, 13. And I remember having a conversation with my stepmom at the time, because I'd had copies of some of his records that were his old records that my mum had found in the loft. And when I'd got a record player at about the age of 12, she said, "Do you want these old records?" And okay, didn't realise what they were, but it was, I can remember to this day what they were. It was Six Wives, Tales from Topographic Oceans.
Oh, wow.
Going for the One, The Grand Illusion by Styx. Those were the 4 records. Mm-hmm. So that became the basis of my introduction into that world of music.
Wow.
So what happened was, when I got to 13 and I was talking to my stepmom about it, they kept talking about Journey. And I was like, what Journey? What journey are you on about? And then she looked at me and she went, well, Journey, your dad's album. And I went, I don't know that. What's that record? Oh, King Arthur was the other one I had as well. So I said, I didn't know King Arthur. Yeah, there it is. And oddly enough, I was actually at the concert, apparently. I was only a year and a half, but I was there.
Okay.
It probably explains why I'm deaf in one ear.
Could be part of it.
So anyway, Nina, was my stepmother, said to my dad, how come he hasn't heard this record? And he went, oh, I don't know. And then I said, well, can I hear it? And so what he did, he bought quite an old big house, and he had an old snooker table which he put in the top of the house, like a small 8-foot type snooker table. Okay. And he put a stereo up there and the snooker table, and then just a pile of vinyl. And I sort of went up there, and that's where I discovered Tomato, which I also see on your shelf behind you, which is, has often renowned to be my favorite Yes album. And it is because of that period of my life when I was going and seeing my dad at weekends, playing snooker in his little room at the top, and listening to these records that he'd given me to listen to, of which one was Tomato, and I really enjoyed listening to it over and over again. So that's why that album always has a special place for me, even though a lot of other Yes fans go, get it. I don't get why that one is your favorite when there's other records around there. So, for me, music is always attributed to memories. That's what makes music special.
So true. So true.
So basically, I'm 13, 14, and I don't really know much of the Yes story or much of the Yes history. I'm starting to spend time with Dad. And obviously, he's working on solo records at the time. Things like he was doing The Time Machine, The Gospels, Silent Nights, all those sort of things from the early 80s. And I was really interested in all that sort of stuff that he was doing. And he did the Gospels record. I can't remember what year the Gospels record was. But he used to, when we used to get to do stuff, he always used to give me all the demo tapes and all the pre-release stuff. So I sort of knew his music really well. So I didn't actually really know the Yes stuff really well, except for Tomato. That was the only one that I really knew intimately. I knew Tales a little bit, and I knew Going for the One quite well. But so I didn't really know a lot of the history of Yes. I didn't know the in and out of Yes saga, because by then he'd only been in the band probably twice, I think, because he joined first of all, left in 1977, and I don't know whether he came back again before then. He probably didn't up until ABWH. He'd probably only been in the band once at that point. So everybody's thinking now, trying to work out this.
It was twice. It was twice. He came for Fragile. Twice? He left before Relayer. He came back for Tomato and Going for the One, and then he left again.
Sorry, that's it. So I'm thinking that. So he'd gone. So basically, I knew he'd left for Relay, then he'd gone back, and then he'd left. And John had left, and it was like. And then when I was a teenager, of course, my friends had 90125, and I was like, wow, this is great. It's absolutely nothing like the Yes that I'd heard on Tomato, but I loved the songs, loved the records, all that sort of stuff. And so I sort of just didn't really think about Yes too much. And then he said, it was a summer holiday. And he said, I'm going to be away over the summer holiday when I'd normally see you, because we normally go and stay with him for a week or so. And he said, would you, I'd like you to come out to America. And I said, oh, okay. Well, it was me and my brother. I was about 17, I think, and my brother was 15. And he said, okay, why is that? And he said, well, I'm touring with some of the guys that I used to work with in Yes, which was Jon Anderson, Steve Howe, and Bill Bruford. And we were like, okay, great. So we got to go on an aeroplane and fly over to America. We got there and he said, oh, your stepmom's come out as well. And Nina was there. And so it was lovely. And we said, well, what's happening? He said, well, you're going to come along and watch 4 or 5 shows, spend a bit of time hanging out. I'll put you on a plane. You go back to England and then you go back to school, because your school year starts around September the 6th or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, great. So that is the whole build up as to why I ended up at this concert going to see ABWH. And it wasn't the first ever concert I've been to, because obviously I just said that was Journey at the age of 2, but as I couldn't remember it, that didn't seem to make much sense. And I had seen a lot of his solo shows, but this was probably the first big event show that I'd been to where I was aware of what was happening. But the other thing about ABWH that was interesting for me was it was probably also, remember I'm 17 and it's 1989, the era of New Romantics, all that sort of stuff, edging towards grunge and that sort of stuff, edging into. You didn't see Dad's records or Jon Anderson's records in the record shops. It wasn't that sort of thing. So when I was growing up at 16, 17 in school, or actually when I was younger than that, actually thinking about it when I was a younger age, it's going to sound awful now, but I got teased at school massively because my dad was this musician from the 70s, a bit of a dinosaur, because at the period of time, you weren't popular as a musician. There wasn't the nostalgia market that there is now. So musicians for the 70s, kids at school didn't go, hey, your dad was really famous 10 years ago, wasn't he? It was like, oh, your dad's that bloke that's on Good Morning Television sometimes wearing jumpers and things, isn't it? It was not that sort of thing until I got to about 16 or 17. And of course, when you get to 16, 17, all kids, as they turn into young adults, start to discover music that isn't the boppy, teenagey stuff that's in the charts. And there was this kid at school who was a bit of the bully, and he was a big kid. And he came up to me one day in the lunch hall, and I went, hello. And he went, oh, are you all right? And I went, yeah, I'm fine. He went, your dad played with David Bowie? And I went, yeah, he did. Went, that's pretty cool, and walked off. And it sort of, and I suddenly went, oh, because everybody was now discovering this music from the previous decade, and suddenly they realized that he'd done some stuff, and it actually, that knowledge of what he'd done was suddenly a bit cool.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was sort of like just beginning to get this understanding that, oh, actually, it's not just dad, and I'd seen him play in his own band and stuff, but he had a sort of much wider audience of awareness than I was aware of. I had no idea, because when you live inside the bubble, you have no idea what's going on outside the bubble or how the bubble is perceived. So I remember walking into a local record shop, and it was a two-story. It was like a Tower Records or an HMV or something like that. And I walked in, and all the way up the stairwell, going up to the second floor, was ABWH album sleeves stapled all the way up there. And I remember walking to this shop and going, wow, I had no concept of that was his level of
fame.
Yeah. I had no concept of it. And now that sounds, anyone listening to this is going to go, that's ridiculous. That's stupid. But when you grow up inside that sort of world of silly cars and stupid photo shoots, and you've got a house and there's a special room just for the pinball machine, when you live in that sort of world, people used to say to me, wow, that's an amazing childhood. How was that then? How did it feel? And it's like, it felt like a childhood. You only get one. That's the only one you're aware of. That's right. So you don't think it's anything unusual. You thought everybody had a Cadillac on the driveway and a room with pinball tables in it. Why wouldn't you? It's just what, as a kid, it's not anything of look what we have. It's this is just what's around, and this is what I get used to.
Yeah. He's just your dad.
Yeah. So suddenly, and he went away for ages, and then he'd come back, and then he'd go away again. And so suddenly walking into a record shop and seeing ABWH everywhere was a bit of a realization for me. And then I got the copy of the record, and then obviously really enjoyed the record. Thought it was a great record. And then, of course, ending up in America and at this thing and seeing where the show was, which I think was the Summit in Houston, which was, I think it's changed its name now, but it's a huge old place.
Basketball arena, 17,000 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And suddenly that was a different awareness to when I'd seen Dad play at Hammersmith Odeon, which is like 3,000 people. Suddenly going into this environment, you suddenly went, wow, I had no concept of this.
I'm guessing it was probably a little rowdier in Houston than at the Hammersmith.
It was quite rowdy in Hammersmith. I remember I played Hammersmith. It's
Why
a
does
bit
everybody have cowboy hats on? What's going on here?
That's the build up to it. I don't know whether you actually got a question or whether you just want me to keep rambling.
That's brilliant. And I think you gave us a little concept of what it's like to be inside the bubble one of the last times that you were on.
Yeah.
When you talk about, like, in our family, no one makes a big deal out of, oh, I just played Royal Albert Hall or I just toured Japan. But if you say, I fixed the toilet from running, they're like, oh, wow, how did you do that? Because playing Royal Albert Hall is not that big of a deal, like it would be to me in Jackson. Like when I left my first Royal Albert Hall show after seeing Yes, actually, and I met Lisa Wetton, she was sitting right behind me. I was on the phone with the cab. Jackson, you won't believe what I just saw, And there's been hundreds of thousands of shows over the years, but like to us, that's magic. But for you, it's like, yeah, that's just kind of my life,
Years later, I went to see Deep Purple and the show finished, and I was like, what happens now? I thought I normally go backstage and have a chat. It was like, I have to leave now? And it wasn't a ego thing. It was literally just like, that was the environment. It's like your workplace. You kind of get used to that environment of actually being able to do it.
Hi, this is Steve Howe of Yes, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
Didn't you also buy Astra when you went to that record shop?
I did. So what happened is when we turned up, there was, now I'm going to say it was Houston. Now, the only reason I remember it's Houston is because it was when Tony Levin got sick.
Oh.
So the 4 shows that we were supposed to see didn't happen. And I vaguely remember that we saw one show with Tony Levin, then didn't see anything. And then we saw a show with Jeff Berlin, and then we had to go.
Ah, okay.
So I remember watching the show. So the actual show part itself is probably going to make the least part of this conversation, because it's all the stuff that happened around the show that is the kind of the stories that go with it. But they did a record signing somewhere, some record store somewhere.
Okay.
And we all went along. They all went in a limo, and my brother and I went in a follow-up car or something. And we turned up there, and I met the store manager, and he came to me and said, "Oh, it's brilliant that your dad and the guys are doing this. It's really going to help us. We're flogging records like crazy." And I was like, "Oh, great. That's really good, you know." And he said, "Look, if you fancy a couple of records, just go and help yourself as a gift on me. Go round, pick up a couple of records, and he said, I can't remember what he said, take 3 or 4. Go grab 3 or 4 records.
It's nice.
Tell them you said it." And I was like, wow, that's great. And I don't know whether you still do it over there, but in the UK, CDs were literally just the jewel case. That was it. Whereas when I went to this record store in America, it was that period of time where you had the double height cardboard sleeves.
The long boxes, they call them. Yeah.
The long boxes. Yeah. And that the whole store was like that. So it was like the old days of going through a vinyl rack, you know. And I remember I picked up Astra, and I picked up I remember picking up the Final Cut by Pink Floyd as well. I think they were the 2 I can remember. I can't remember what else I picked up, but yeah, I did pick up Astra at the time because I was a bit of an Asia fan.
We used to take those the cardboard and cut them up and make like a little poster, because you figure you paid for it, you might as well get your money's worth out of it.
Absolutely,
and it was big enough to put on the wall and look pretty cool.
Yeah, we met in college, so that's how we decorated the dorm room.
Yeah,
right.
Right. Yeah. No, because we never had those in the UK. We never had those at all in the UK. It was always just the sleeve.
Interesting.
Which, I mean, I think it's a shame. I think they'd still be a great thing to do, you know, if they did.
Yeah, it was probably an expense thing, because that didn't last very long, and then they ended up putting in a reusable like plastic. It was the same size,
same height. Yeah.
Right. But as soon as you bought it, they just took it out and reused it for something else. So yeah,
right.
that was a cool period of time that was very short-lived in the United States.
Right. So I don't feel so bad now, because I thought you had it all the time, and we'd really missed out.
Yeah, no.
Unfortunately, not. No.
So I remember we did that, and anyway, I remember going to the show, and like you say, it was bedlam. It was just ridiculous. And to actually talk about the show, I actually had a quick watch of it the other day to remind myself, because your memory plays tricks, and you're going, was it actually there? You know, but I do remember the bit of John walking out through the audience, which I thought was very cool.
Bizarre though, cool, but I've never seen anything like that.
No, and I think it was that. I think it was their way of getting the solos out the way, getting them out the way early on, so they could just get into the show. And I think because it was under their names, it was kind of like. And if I remember, the only one that didn't get the solo straight away was
Bruford.
I think he did his at the end of Long Distance Runaround, and they sort of did some bits and pieces. But the first one that he did, and I remember this particularly, was he did the solo with Tony Levin. And Tony Levin was doing a lot of the stuff with the sticks on the fingers. And I remember thinking, that's great. I can't wait to see that again. And then, of course, didn't, because then Tony Levin got sick.
Tony got
so
sick.
I didn't get to see it again. But I remember that being very, very, very cool. Going to sound dreadful, but I knew the music from ABWH probably better than I knew the Yes pieces of music at that point in my life, because it was a new record. I'd seen it everywhere. I listened to it all the time. I just was listening to this record over and over and over again. So when I watched the video the other day, it was a weird feeling looking back at the concert and listening to the stuff from ABWH and getting a certain memory of, wow, I remember listening to those songs when I first got it. Yeah. And then listening to them do Long Distance Runaround or Close to the Edge and going, oh yeah, I remember playing that solo. You know, it was like two different memories colliding at the same time. So it was very, you know, at the time it was great. Looking back at the concert, it was a really weird feeling. You know, it was kind of odd. But I do remember the show being great, but I remember Tony Levin was quite unwell. But what makes the story really interesting is then we got told, of course, that the show was being cancelled. We went to Dallas, which I believe was the next show.
Okay.
And of course, the show didn't happen. So it was like, okay, so what's going to happen? So we spent a day or so having a look around. We stayed in Dallas, I think, for a few days. And I remember going to the top of one of the buildings with a rotating restaurant and the traditional thing of putting something down to the side of you and then realizing half an hour later it's gone halfway around the building and you're suddenly panicking because you think you've lost something. All the stuff that you guys probably, everybody in America has done at some point, whereas in England that never happens because we don't have things that, interesting.
That fun.
Was this your first time to the United States?
I want to say yes. It was my first conscious time of going to America because I came along when I was a very little baby. My mum and dad were. There's a story for a different day, but we were in America when I was a very little boy, and the plane that we were due to catch to come home crashed. So,
geez,
wow!
I have a few stories of near missing aeroplanes that.
Holy mackerel! Well, I'm glad you missed that one. Yeah. No, I want to bet, Jackson, that they were going to play Reunion Arena in Dallas before it got canceled because that was the venue at the time. In some ways, Oliver, I mean, I know this is basically Yes, and Yes was very big in the '80s, but for a band that didn't exist to all of a sudden just go out and play arenas is kind of rare. Now, obviously, these are seasoned veterans. You're basically Yes without Chris Squire. Yeah. And Yes can sell out these arenas and amphitheaters or what all they played. But in some ways, it was still kind of surprising. I figured they might have to do theaters and build up to arenas, but they sure enough had the right booking people who not only booked them, but they filled those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is pre-internet as well. So this is literally just on Music Press, letting people know, it's but the thing is, because I was only 17, I didn't really have the awareness of any of that at the time. It was just completely, it was like, I think it was just an element of realization because of course it was in a different country as well. So it wasn't even in the UK. It was a different country where all these people knew who Dad was. And that just made it very strange. But then the next thing that happened, which is a continuation of the story, which actually is kind of the genesis to me actually ending up with Yes myself, which was when they were there, the album was doing well. Brother of Mine had come out as a single and had done quite well. And they were looking to what should we release as the next single. And of course, the record isn't really built around singles.
That's right.
So they were sort of going, I can't remember whether they did The Order of the Universe in some form as a single or not. But what they decided to do was the only track that they could think of that would work next was the track I'm Alive. That was a sort of a quarter of the song Quartet. That was the one that they could do as a single.
Gotcha.
And it came out as a video single on the In the Big Dream VHS, if I remember correctly. And I remember that video specifically. Sorry, I jump around all over the place.
Go, jump, babe.
You're just going to be like, well, that was interesting, but it was absolutely nothing like we were planning for this show. I remember that distinctly because there's a section in there where Dad's playing a keyboard that appears to be floating, and apparently it was two roadies that had to sort of hide underneath it and just carry it, and then had to be airbrushed out of this video as they were put onto this background.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, they decided that they wanted to release I'm Alive, but in order to re-release it, they couldn't just cut it from the record because it wasn't a standalone track. It sort of segued in from another section of the song.
Okay.
And then they decided, well, if we're going to do that, let's do some overdubs on it and make it a little bit different. And I distinctly remember saying, well, can I go to the studio and watch? And they were like, yeah, we've booked into a studio down the zone. And I went down and Dad didn't spend very long there. And I said, can I stay? And he said, yeah, you can stay. And oddly enough, at the same time, Dylan Howe had come out to see his dad.
Oh, wow.
So me and Dylan Howe are in this studio. And the two people that are in the studio doing work is Bill Bruford and Steve Howe. And I remember thinking, this is weird. My dad buggered off. Steve Howe's son isn't interested in his guitars at all. He's talking to Bill Bruford because he wants to learn more about drum. Yeah. And I'm here talking to Steve. And I remember Steve distinctly had this Steinberger guitar, the headless blue Steinberger guitar.
Oh, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is what he used on that record. And I remember sitting with him whilst he was doing all his guitar lines for it. And Bill was doing a few percussion-y bits and pieces. And I distinctly remember that. And that is probably when I spent some time with Steve and actually got to know him a little bit, because I didn't really know John. I didn't know Chris at all. Bill had left the band in 74, I want to say, after Close to the Edge.
Yeah, sounds about right. Right before Tales from Topographic Oceans, I think.
So I was 2 when Bill left the band. I was 5 when Dad left the band. So you have to remember, when I was a little kid, it wasn't like Yes came round for a cup of tea and a piece of cake. It wasn't the 5 of them sat around a table. It was, that didn't happen. So I'd never met them really in any form. So I sort of spent some time talking to Steve and got on quite well with him, to the point that many years later, when I bumped into him, oddly enough, on a train station, he said to me, "Oh, do you want a lift?" And then we got talking, and then he said, "Oh, you'll have to come over and have a cup of tea." And so that only happened because I'd spent time with him in the studio.
At the mix of I'm Alive.
When they were doing the overdubs for I'm Alive.
Wow.
So technically my Yes journey started because Tony Levin got ill.
Interesting. And at that time, Oliver, how accomplished of a musician were you yourself? I mean, you've been taking lessons your whole life at that point?
I started when I was 5 and did that usual thing of learning. I started a little before that. I remember distinctly I don't know what you call it, recess or whatever it is in America, but over here we call it playtime. It was first playtime. And I remember distinctly going into piano lessons and having the stars put on my fingers and the keys and doing that whole thing. I'm looking out the window thinking, all my friends are out there having playtime and I'm in here learning this instrument. And I obviously didn't mind, because I was giving up playtime to learn something. But that's one of my earliest memories. And that came before that. My earliest memory of a keyboard was walking into the lounge. We had a grand piano in the corner of the lounge. And no one was in. And I walked up to the piano one day and just put some fingers on the keys. And somehow I managed to hit a perfect chord. And it sounded amazing. And I went, wow, how did that happen? Brilliant. Oh, this is easy. Then did it again. And of course, it sounded dreadful. And then thought, well, I'm going to have to learn how to do this. And so then I went off and had lessons. And then I did the usual things, lessons up to a certain age, did some stuff, some grades and bits and pieces, and then discovered the guitar and discovered football and discovered girls and all that sort of stuff, all the things that get in the way.
That's right.
And then, so I sort of moved a little bit away from doing a lot of music and was playing a lot more guitar. And then I started playing keyboards again and sort of really found that I had an affinity with the instrument, and my hands would do sort of what I wanted them to do. I could think about things, I could work things out and do stuff. And then when I was about 16, 17, something like that, somebody phoned up. Look, they heard, because my brother played keyboards obviously as well, and he's a very successful musician.
Still does, yeah.
And yeah, he still does. And he was with a band, and I know that he wasn't looking to join another band, and somebody phoned up and said, "Hi, I'm looking for Adam." I said, "Oh yeah, why is that?" They said, "Want him to join a band." I said, "He didn't want to join any of the bands." They went, "Oh." I said, "I play." And so
nice.
Nice. So I went on and joined that band, and then did loads of gigs and playing all over the place. And then I went back and decided to go back and do more classical training, because I wanted to get my technique better. And I always I always maintained that it was a really good journey for me, for the way that I am. It was really two things: going out and just playing in jam bands, improvising, always playing with musicians that were much older than me, was a really good learning environment for me. And it was as valuable as the learning I got from my classical teacher, that taught me about the theory, the basics of reading and the basics of understanding how other instruments work. That sort of theoretical and technique was invaluable, but that doesn't teach you how to stand up in front of a beer-addled audience and make them listen to you and have some interaction with people. So those two journeys complemented each other really well.
Well, I think people would be interested to hear that, Oliver, because I think a lot of people just kind of assume, well, yeah, you're Rick Wakeman's kid. Of course, you got his genes. B, he probably showed you how to do all that stuff. Like, well, actually, you didn't live with Rick most of your childhood, or really any of it, that, after a certain point. So you didn't have that exposure, by sitting next to him all the time. So it's a journey you kind of had to take on your own, and maybe a little later than most people might have realized.
Well, yeah, he never showed me anything.
Anything?
No, never.
Wow.
No, never. It was literally just, no, he played, he did his things. He would go out, he was off playing golf or whatever, and I'd sit at the piano and play. And he never once, to this day, he's never once shown me anything or told me. The only time he's ever shown me anything was when I played at the O2 with him, where he wanted a second keyboard player to play King Arthur, and he had the parts that he wanted played. So he scored it out for me and then came over and said, "And I want you to do this here." And that was the only time that we've actually sat down at a piano and he's gone, "This is what I want you to do." That was because it was, "This is what I want you to play," not "This is how I played so and so."
Gotcha.
And even when I joined Yes, I learned the music from Yes, which was, I didn't know the set list up until about 4 weeks before the first show. And they sent me a load of CDs, and then they sent me a set list, and we had 2 weeks rehearsal in Hamilton, and I had a week before that to rehearse on my own to work everything out. And it was literally done with a record player and the record or the CD stopping, playing a bit, going back, playing it again,
Wow.
over and over again, and occasionally recording a little bit and putting it into a little bit of software that could slow things down a little bit.
Okay.
Not, and just so you could even, because some of the music that you hear and you've got to learn is quite low in the mix, and so you're really trying to focus on what it actually is there. And that was all I had. It was, this is long before the days of YouTube and track separations and isolated tracks all over on YouTube, and none of that existed. So it was literally just sit down and work it all out, and it was like cramming for an exam.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah. And it was literally just, and of course, once I got the basics of it in my head, I went to America and then met my keyboard tech for the first time and my keyboard rig for the first time, which was completely new as well, because I had some gear come in from America, some of my own gear had come out. And then it was trying to program all this stuff, choreograph how you're going to work around the keyboards whilst still learning. I used to go into the rehearsal room at 8 a.m. with music on my headphones, play along. They would all turn up at 1 o'clock. We'd play through to about 5 or 6 o'clock. I'd finish, go back to my hotel room with a little MIDI keyboard and play over parts over and over and over again. And the first show was like 3 hours long, 3.5 hours long. It was a lot of music.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
It was a lot of stuff to sort of keep in your head, but it made the show go quick. I tell you, it didn't feel like 3.5 hours. It went just like that.
Because you're working during those 3.5 hours.
Really concentrating to get it through. And I remember midway through. Sorry, we're not even talking about the other show now.
It's all good, man.
We've passed that. And I remember midway through the rehearsals things, Chris took me to one side and he went, "I've written this other piece of music." And I was like, "Oh yeah." He said, "Let me play it to you." And it was his track Aliens, which I actually really liked. And he played it to me. Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, it's really good, Chris. Shouldn't we get back to rehearsal? He said, "No, I want to put this in the set as well." And it was like, what I wanted to say was, "You're expletive kidding me, aren't you?"
Yes. You're going to pile something else on top of this already, Chris. Come on.
We haven't got enough already. And then he said, no, I want to do this. I went, all right, okay. He said, "I want you to do the piano arrangement for it." I said, "There isn't one." No, you've got to come up with that as well for me. And then, right, fair enough. So that sort of got dropped in as well. And then Steve didn't want to play on that track.
What was the time frame of this? Like, you needed to do this like in how, like tomorrow?
We were midway through the 2-week rehearsals of the first show, about 7 days away.
Sure, throw that on the pile.
Yeah, and then we got one day where Chris went, "I think we need a day off." And then there was another day we had to do a photo session, and you're going, "Oh, please no, don't keep taking the days out," because what was really odd about it, and I didn't really think about it at the time, but Benoit actually was the one that said to me, we were walking back. We used to walk from the Hamilton Theatre, and there was a sort of bridge that went over the road, a glass bridge. And I distinctly remember we used to do that walk every day into work and every day back home to the hotel. And we were walking along there one day and he said, "You're doing really well." And I said, "I feel like I'm desperately trying to keep my head above water." Mm-hmm. And he said, "You've got the hardest job here." I said, "Well, what do you mean? We're all doing the set." He said, "These 3 guys." I went, "Yeah." He said, they're 60. I went, "Yeah." He said, "Not only did they write this music, they've been playing it since they were 18, most of this." Said they know it inside and out. And of this set, there's probably 3 pieces of music in there that they haven't played for a while. He said the rest of it is standards for them.
That's right.
And he said, and I was in a Yes tribute band. He said, so I have sung 3/4 of the set for the last 4 years. He said, and you've turned up and you're having to learn all this stuff. And everybody just thinks that your dad will have shown it and you've been, from the age of 4, it was like sitting at a piano being taught roundabout. It wasn't like that at all. It was literally trying to learn it, because I never had the inclination to sit down and work out roundabout. Why would I? I was too interested in playing in the blues band down the pub and writing my own music and things. And he said, and you're trying to get all this stuff. And he said, and the other thing you don't realize is, he said, because Chris is all over the place brilliantly, but he moves all over the place. And Steve is very sort of jazzy and against the beat and a bit out there sometimes. He said, it's really only you and Alan that are often in that area of actually having to think where everybody else gets to play their parts around. And he said, I said, so what are you saying? And he said, glad I'm the singer. And it suddenly made me go, oh, right. Okay. Yeah. I hadn't thought of it like that. I just thought of it as the five of us together going at it. And it was like, actually, so it was a really, quite a stressful few weeks, but I wouldn't change it for anything. It was such a great experience to do,
And by the way, for whatever it's worth, because I saw you on, I guess it was 2011, we were kind of at your end of your tenure of the band. You looked cool as hell on stage. You got the long hair. You always had good clothes. I don't know how many keyboards you're surrounded by, but Steve, looks like Steve. Chris had let himself go a little bit. Alan's behind the drums and he's kind of lost his hair. Benoit's no Robert Plant. So I'm like, yeah, Oliver Wakeman, he's cool as hell, man. Look at him over there. Who needs the caped guy? This is the guy we want now, so.
That's very kind of you.
Oh, it's cool. Yeah. Well, it's cool for me and Jackson to have someone our age who are in these bands that we love now, right? Because we saw, like you said, 90125, we saw him on MTV all the time. We saw Steve in Asia, on MTV. So I wouldn't say they were like gods, but when you see someone when you're 9 or 10, that's a different stratosphere. That's totally different. You almost can't relate to them, even though we've interviewed Steve and Jeff at this point. But I don't know, it just feels to be able to speak to someone of our own generation about, like you say, you were a fan, or all of a sudden you're at an ABWH show when you're a teenager, but then one day it was your gig, which is pretty cool, pretty special, man.
Yeah, it does. I sort of every now and then I sort of sit down and just sort of think, yeah, that's done okay. But my trouble is I'm always thinking of what's the next thing I've got to do? What's the next thing I've got to focus on? Because I've got so much stuff to do. I'm just constantly going, right, got to write this, got to do that session, got to do this. Because I do, the only way I reminisce now is I do a lot of stuff on Facebook now. I've suddenly, the last 6 months, I started doing more and more on Facebook. And I generally find songs that have inspired me, records that have inspired me, bits of memorabilia.
You've dug out some really cool stuff that you shared with us on Facebook. I mean, really neat stuff. And I'm just glad that you shared that and kept it. Because quite frankly, a lot of people in the business, they see those as like junk. That's stuff that'll weigh you down, or that's stuff for the fans. But you're kind of in both worlds, so I'm just glad you kept it.
Yeah, I do. I mean, people have given me some lovely gifts over the years, and it's sort of you've taken the time to bring something for me. It's very nice. I respect that, and I like the things that people give me. Whenever I used to go on tour, I used to buy. My house is full of things that I've bought on tour or people have given me, and some of it has to be stored, but I do keep everything, and I post some stuff that people have given me as gifts on tour. There's there's some stuff up here on my bookcase behind me on the top that I had from tours that people have given me, and I'm just very, very grateful. I find it. So I quite like doing this Facebook sharing thing of actually talking about this sort of stuff. So I talk about records that have influenced me, but it's not just about, hey, here's a record, I like this one, do you like it as well? It's kind of, I try and do a story behind it as to when I discovered the record, what it meant to me, what songs in particular, why those songs were important to me. And then I talk about records that I've been on or early records of mine. And it's just a way, and people comment. I get so many comments from people, and I genuinely try and read everything that everybody puts in there. I mean, and 99% of the comments are really, really friendly, really nice, and really interesting. There's a couple of people that write the occasional thing that
always
get
have
away
to
from
be
those
the
trolls.
troublemaker. Yeah.
You sort of go, oh, and I do get quite a few that people just say, "Is this actually you?" And I actually always reply, "It is me. Yes, it is." Because I do know there's a lot of people that just take a name and pretend to be somebody to try and. But for me, it's a genuine way of actually interacting with people, and actually, it's a nice way of letting people know what music you're actually doing yourself, because of course I'm associated with these other bands, but it's nice for people to know that I do my own music as well, and then maybe people would like to give that a try as well, but it's also great to talk about the history with Yes, and I've found out some really, I won't share them here, but I've had some messages from people that have been phenomenally touching about what music or my dad or things that I've been involved with have meant to them in their lives. And without that medium of being able to do that through social media, I would never have known that, or people wouldn't have been able to tell me about those sort of things. And some people have shared some stuff with me, and I've shared it with Dad, and it's made Dad's day knowing that his music has helped people in difficult times, things like that. And that's the sort of stuff that I really like about doing that. So I'm going to continue doing that because I find it's a really nice way of hearing that sort of stuff. But also, it's really great hearing other people's stories about records that I like. And also, people write to me and say, "You're completely wrong. You should listen to that track." And it's like, okay, I'll have a listen to that track.
Thanks for the scoop. Yeah,
because sometimes you don't hear bands. Sometimes bands don't register in in whatever swim lane you're in. It doesn't register because it just wasn't the path that you took. And I posted one yesterday about Steve Howe's album about Bob Dylan. And, I always said I was never a massive Dylan fan because I found his vocals quite difficult to get past.
Nice way to put it.
It was only hearing Portraits of Bob Dylan by Steve Howe that I realized, obviously I'd heard All Along the Watchtower by Hendrix, who hasn't, but it was like, actually, there's some amazing, what a songwriter. And then so I wrote this and everyone was saying, some people were saying, I have exactly the same problem. And other people were going, you need to start with this record. Try this record, and this record will be your... And that, for me, is what I love, because I'm at heart a music fan. I remember my dad sitting down with me years ago and giving me a copy of King Crimson and saying, you have to listen to this. You have to listen to this record. And I went, okay, great. I put it on. I was on an aeroplane once, put it on, and it blew my mind. It's still one of my favorite records to this day. He's a fan of music. Mm-hmm. We're all, no matter how much of a pedestal you put some of these people on, they're all fans of music, which is why they wanted to do music in the first place. I'm just fortunate that through choices that I've made and stuff that I've done, and I've been fortunate to get into that world of being able to hang out, talk to, and work with some of these people that were very influential to me when I was growing up. But on the other side of the coin, I'm actually a fan of the music and other bands that I don't know. There are other bands there where people just say, oh, you must know so and so. It's like, no, never met them, but what a great band.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah.
And it's like that sort of stuff. And so I enjoy that experience of sharing that stuff on Facebook and getting people's opinions as well. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. Sorry, we've gone completely off topic.
You were talking about this show took place when you were in a high school age, and I remember at that point in time, that's how you decided if somebody was cool or not. You saw them with a band T-shirt on. Oh yeah, okay, I think I like this guy. I think this could be okay. It's a way to connect people together. And it's cool to hear from someone like you who is a professional musician. You can still say, I'm a fan of these songs and this is why they mean things to me. And there's nothing better than having somebody tell you about a record. Like, I haven't even heard of that before. Or I heard it, but I didn't know. Go back and listen to it. And then you say, oh, now I get it. Now I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you are the person that left the trail of breadcrumbs back to the original conversation, because I completely lost where I was supposed to be.
Well, we're just glad to hear that you're going to keep doing that, Oliver, because honestly, it's really cool. You have a lot of great stuff in your collection. Like you say, it's great interaction. I don't know if you know the Gottlieb brothers, who've done a lot of work with Yes and Steve Howe. This is volume 3. Volume 4 is going to be a collection of fan stories.
Oh, wow.
Which is, I think, a really neat thing to do. I don't know if I've got time to submit mine. I was going to tell a story of how I took my daughter, who was 11, to see Yes this past year. And we went to go get the program because I know the Gottlieb brothers, so I wanted to get the program and check it out. The guy working the booth was so glad to see someone that young there. He just gave her one of Steve's guitar strings. Like, look, this is what Steve plays on. She looked at him like she was getting a piece of gold. She's like, really? Daddy, Steve plays this? I'm like, yeah, because she's a budding guitar player. It's like, this is amazing. She has it hanging up in her room right now.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I've got Alan White's drumsticks up on my wall over there.
Oh, wow.
His it's important, all these bits and pieces, it matters. And that's why whenever I was on tour, whenever anybody asked me questions, wanted to talk to me, I would do it, because it's like, I'm just pleased that people are interested. It's it's a nice, particularly around that time when I was working with Yes, it was a nice period of time for the band. The band have had many ups and downs over the years, and there's been many periods where you'd walk into a restaurant and all 5 of them would be at 5 different tables. And when I was in the band, because there was no Jon there,
right?
And I'm not saying Jon was was sort of he I'm going to say divide and conquer sort of thing. It's not really quite right, but he was the person that led the band. He was coming with songs ideas. He was the sort of person at the front of the band, fronting the band, all that sort of stuff. So when he wasn't there, Chris, Steve and Alan didn't have that sort of hub of the band to work with. So the three of them couldn't be individuals anymore. They had to work together.
Interesting.
So they worked a lot closer together than they'd ever done before. So they were often talking about how they were going to do stuff. And of course, Benoit and I were there. And so it had to become a close-knit band rather than 5 individuals that were well known, all trying to pull in slightly different directions,
Sure, yeah.
Because, you'd have, Chris and Alan sort of going, well, I want to do Owner of a Lonely Heart. And Steve was like, but I don't. And it was just interesting, but they had to sort of compromise and work together to put together the best show they could because they had something to prove, and it was really interesting. So when we would go there, we would all hang out with each other at different times. You'd come downstairs and Benoit would be having breakfast with Steve. I'd be chatting to Alan. Me, Alan, and the tour manager would go out for a meal. Me, Benoit, and Chris would go out. It just mixed and matched. It was like everybody's working together and enjoying each other's company, and that's what made it so pleasant. That's what made it such an enjoyable tour.
Well, I'll tell you, when Steve and Alan and Chris really got together on Drama, I think it kind of drove Jon and Rick away. But for whatever reason, they were just tight. They were kind of just found the rhythm, they found the sound together. I think Drama is one of the most underrated Yes albums there is. And at the time, it was like, no Jon Anderson, no Rick Wakeman, no thanks. And I think the British press were particularly rough on them. And yes, Trevor Horn had a hard time duplicating Jon's voice. But if you go back and listen, and I know you have, and I probably played some of those songs, I think some of that is quintessential Yes. I mean, really important pieces of the catalog. And it's because those three were really together at that point. Now, it didn't last long, but it worked.
Yeah, I think that's we did play a couple of the pieces from Drama on the In the Present tour, which I really enjoyed playing them. It was great fun. But so I think they had that sort of element as we've got to make it work this time. We've got to really make it go the distance, and it did for a while. We did 3-4 years together of working, and it only changed ironically because of Trevor Horn again. It was that was decision. But what was interesting about that whole time was I look at it back as a very happy time. Even though it didn't finish the way I wanted it to finish. And obviously, doing the From a Page record a few years ago was a big thing for me when so many people commented on how much they enjoyed that music. So that was, I look back, it's in an odd sort of way, because I've been working on that From a Page record and people still talk to me about it and I get talked all about it. You still sort of feel a part of the band. It's a really odd thing. Even though you've been in it and you're out of it, you still feel like a part of that world, if that makes sense. It's an odd one to try and explain. Yeah, it was a good time.
Well, that's not shocking. And, Rick, for years, has said how important 90125 was to Yes going forward. And I mean, for years, and he did play on that record. But he's like, if we didn't have that, then Yes wouldn't still be an ongoing concern in the 90s, in the 2000s, whenever his last time with them were. Even when he was talking about ARW, he was like, we needed 90125. Whereas some people, maybe they play guitar, who didn't play on that album, are like, no, we're an albums band. We're not a singles band, and we don't need to play that stuff anymore. I'm like, well, there's a lot of people who like that album a lot,
Yeah, lineups are an interesting conversation. It's a whole separate conversation. But I get a lot of messages from people who really enjoyed the period of time with me and Benoit. And then I get a lot of messages from people who write to me and say, I wish I'd given it a go, because I've heard the Live from Leon record. I've heard all the stories. I didn't come because Jon wasn't there. Yeah. But actually, they may not be as enamored with the latest direction that Yes takes and go, I wish I'd seen that lineup. I wish I'd seen that one.
Yeah, I bet.
And so I get that a lot from an awful lot of people, which is, is quite gratifying in its way. And the best thing I think Chris ever said to me was, we were sat down one day and we were talking about music to put into the set. I think we were talking about putting Perpetual Change in. I think we did that. And we were talking about other pieces to do. And he said, you know what? I said, what, Chris? He said, I don't think there's one song in the Yes discography that this lineup couldn't do justice to. And I was like, wow, that's a really nice sort of validation.
High praise indeed.
Yeah. And that was great. I also remember sitting next to Chris on a plane and for 2 hours and just asking him hundreds of yes questions. and we got off the plane afterwards and he went, you talk a lot.
No, that's the thing. Jason Bonham was the same way when they were getting ready for the celebration day or whatever. It's like eventually Robert Plant just he said, you get 2 questions a day and that's it. It's like, we're not having a Led Zeppelin encyclopedia right here. We're just, you want to ask a couple questions, fine, but that's it. You got to stop.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I get that from Jason's point of view, because I had it as well, because it's part of it's a bit of a sort of like your part of your hidden history.
Yeah.
It's because, I see pictures of Dad online sometimes that turn up. People send me pictures of things and it's like, I had no idea about that. I had no idea about that at all. And that's my dad, and the people that he hung out with and the things that he did. And I had absolutely no concept of that at all. And then when you sort of think about your own, if you live in a sort of more traditional lifestyle with your family, you probably know most of your dad's friends. You know who your dad hangs out with down the pub. You know what your dad was doing. Your mum and dad talk about things that they do.
Sure, yeah.
You do that. But suddenly, occasionally online, coming across a photograph and saying, I had no idea about that. Oh, that's what he looked like at that point. I remember getting a copy of the 1984 album, which he did in about 1982, which was before we started to reconnect when he was in Switzerland. And I remember looking at the photograph. I got a copy of this record and I looked at the photograph and I said to Dad, who's that? And he went, what do you mean, who's that? It's me. I was like, when did you have short hair? And he was like, at the end of the 70s, he said, I cut it off and had that photo done and then grew it back again. And it's like just things like that it's odd. I can't really think of a better way of describing it. It's like you're uncovering part of your life and your history. So when you get into that environment, why wouldn't you ask questions? How often have we all had somebody that's passed away in the family and you think, oh, wish I'd sat down and recorded them, because they were the ones that knew that part of the history of the family. And I suppose I have a little bit of that about me, which is I like to understand and know more about all the stuff that's happened, because I find it interesting. My family, I'm also a music fan, so why not get the opportunity?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Harry Whitley from Asia, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
You want to tell us a little bit? You've got a 20th anniversary album, a reissue coming up, and a tour of America coming up here pretty shortly.
Yeah, well, the reissue, I did an album in 2005, 2006 called Mother's Ruin, which was always thought it was my 5th solo record, but it turns out it was my 7th. And it was quite a rocky, keyboardy sort of album, keyboard guitar based record, great vocalist on it. And I really, really liked the record. But the record company that put it out back then went out of business quite shortly afterwards. I put a band together. We were starting to do shows. We did some live shows, did a live show in Europe, had a DVD done, started to do more and more shows. Then the record company folded. People couldn't get hold of the record. Mm-hmm. And then we thought, right, what we're going to do, we'll do some other bits and pieces, maybe do a follow-up record. And then suddenly the whole Yes thing happened. And so it stopped. And then the record has been unavailable for years. And it's always been sort of like one of the parts of my catalogue that's never been available digitally. It's never been available anywhere else unless you buy it from eBay or something for silly prices. And I realised that it was actually its 20th year anniversary, which was A, really exciting, and B, made me feel really old.
Of course.
So I thought I must do something with this. And I was going through the files for it. I thought, let me have a listen to the music again. I was listening to the record and I sort of thought, we sort of mixed this in the 90s, in the late 90s, in the 2000s, when it was very, very, everything was quite guitar led at that time.
True.
And I sort of felt that the mix of the album was quite heavy in guitar and the keyboards were a little less dominant than they should have been. And so I thought, right, I'm going to have a listen to it and see if there's anything we can do with the mix and maybe bring some other. And as I was going through, I realized that there were whole parts that had been missed out that hadn't actually made it through to the mix at all. And this was because it was in the days of limited budget and the early days of Pro Tools, where keyboards were all being triggered by MIDI and MIDI timecode across to another system. So you had two computers talking to each other, but you still had the old analog bit where you're at a desk having to play it in real time and quick fade of 7 up to 8, that sort of stuff. And you're moving across the desk trying to do everything. And you probably had 2 passes at every song to get it right. And so it was that. And so we got the record and listened to it, went, that's great. It sounds brilliant. And it was only then 20 years later when I listened back at it and found all the files, it was like, actually, there's a few bits here that never actually made it on. And actually, I think we could probably remix it. And so Carl Groom, who did the Yes mixing with me, he remixed it for me and remastered it, made it louder, because it was quite a quiet master originally. And then Mercury Records were interested in it and agreed to put it out as a double vinyl and a CD And so that comes out, it's available to pre-order now, and it comes out on March the 13th, I think, which is a few days after I start the tour with Dad. So hopefully I'll have copies when I'm out on the road with Dad, because we're doing, to answer your other question, yeah, it's the first time Dad and I are going to actually have toured together. We've done probably 5 or 6 shows where we've played together over the last 20 years. Did my very first, he joined me on stage once for the launch show of the Mother's Ruin record.
Okay.
And that was the first time we ever played together on stage. And we've played together probably 6 times since then. And so it's going to be actually really nice to actually go and do a full tour together.
Amazing. So 2 quick things for our listeners and for you, Jackson. One is if you go to Oliver Wakeman, your website, and then you click on the Mother's Ruin 20th anniversary, you have a couple options. But if you go to mercurystudios.co, you can order it there. And I've already ordered mine. But what's great is, Jackson, they've got a lot of killer stuff on that website. And they've got, no, I'm telling you, they've got Stone's live stuff on sale right now. I went there to buy Oliver's album. I came out spending $70. It all gets here in March. I can't wait for it. But you should all do that. Also, 2 months from today, March 22nd, you're playing the Ludlow Garage in Cincinnati, which I've never been to. I'm taking her.
Cool.
I let her listen to Anam Cara. I played her some of her stuff, and obviously she likes Yes. I took her to see Yes in the fall, and I said, do you want to go see Rick and Oliver Wakeman? And before I even finished, she's like, oh, yes. I'm like, well, now you don't know all of this. Oh, no. I want to see them. Like, okay, it's on a Sunday night. We can drive home, so we'll be there. Can't wait.
I look forward to seeing you. That'd be great. That'd be really good. Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to that tour. It's the bit that makes it a bit tough is I finish on the 30th. We fly back on the 31st, and I think I'm doing my own tour with my band. We're going out and playing the From a Page record in the UK. So I literally get back. I have 2 days to try and get my head together, and then I'm into a rehearsal room, and then we're off again to do that, and then we're out again in November around the UK, and then hopefully heading off into Europe. So it's which is great, but I feel like I'm back in that world of Yes again, where I've actually got to learn 2 sets of music this time. and because there's only a tiny gap between the 2 tours, I've actually got to learn the second tour's music before I go as well. So I've got to kind of
course you do,
pull it all together. So it's so that's taking time at the moment to try and get that into my head.
Well, no, I can't. I would love to see From a Page, by the way. That would be awesome. Jackson, are you doing business in the UK this year at all?
In the fall. That's the plan right now. So
if it's November, that's when you got to go, apparently, because it's when he's touring again.
Well, I'm telling you, if we get the green light for any time around there, I will definitely check the dates, because that would be that would be awesome.
Cool.
Is this kind of what Rick will be focusing on? You can just...
There'll be probably a piece or 2 from those records.
Oh,
at least one from each of those.
Yes.
And you can imagine that there's probably a little bit of Yes-related stuff happening as well.
Cool. Oh, well, now I'm super psyched. I mean, not that I wasn't psyched to see Rick's solo stuff, but you're going to throw in a little bit of Yes in there. I've never seen Rick. I've obviously seen you play in Yes, but I've never seen Rick before. And so it's a pretty big moment for both of us.
He's phenomenal. I know he's Dad, but I'm a fan as well.
And he's funny. He's got to have fun on stage. He's got to crack some jokes. It's going to be a fun night.
Yeah, we used to do... I mean, to be honest with you, when we've done shows before, this is going to be a little bit more organised, but when we've done the one-off shows before, it's been turn up in the afternoon and work out what we're going to play. And then we did one night where we did 2 shows straight after each other, and it just becomes a laugh. My show we did with my brother, actually, and before he came out, I think we covered his keyboard with care home brochures for retirement home brochures. So when he walked out onto the keyboards, they were there. It's just that sort of stuff. It's good fun. It's good fun.
Good. Are you guys going to break out capes for this one, or are you going to leave those in the vault?
Do you know what? I have never worn a cape, and I don't.
It doesn't surprise me.
That's definitely Dad's thing. I like a nice jacket, a nice coat. Yeah, a nice coat or a nice waistcoat. I'm quite a waistcoat guy. I kind of like that. Waistcoats are nice. They look
sharp on stage. Yeah,
they look good, particularly with a white shirt. It just shows off, and it gives your arms room to breathe. The trouble with wearing a jacket sometimes is you can get a bit constrained, and
probably gets hot too.
It can be. Yeah. The worst one I ever had, as I always used to wear sort of suit type trousers on stage with Yes. Sorry, we are way off topic and probably way over time here. But I used to wear these suit trousers on stage with Yes that had quite wide legs at the bottom because to allow air to flow through when you're hot. And we were playing one night we did a show, one of the rare shows we did in the round, and it was in a big tent, massive great tent, and we were in this thing circling around, and it was an outdoor show obviously with the tent, and I was on stage and I kept moving around, I kept jigging and moving around whilst I was and Scotty, Chris's wife, was there with a friend of hers, and at the end of the show, she came up to me. She said, "I've never seen you so animated on stage." She said, what was it? Were you hot? What was it? Why were you were jigging around? You were behind the keyboards. You were moving around all the time, shaking your legs." She said, "It was great. You looked really animated. That was fantastic. What was it?" And I said, "A load of bugs had flown up my trouser legs."
Oh my God.
And throughout the songs, they were biting me higher and higher and higher up the inside of my thigh. God. And I was desperately trying to dislodge these things and get them out while still trying to solo.
Oh, my goodness. That's great. Well, it's funny now. It wasn't at the time, but...
No.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no. Well, look, Oliver, we could sit and talk to you all day. I know it's late for you there. Were there any more things you wanted to relate about being on that ABWH tour, even though you kind of got cheated out of some shows?
No, I mean, I went to go and see it again in the UK when it came to the UK. And then, of course, it got followed up with the Union tour. And that was, another huge thing, because that wasn't too many years later. I think it was 91. I think we're talking about.
That sounds right, yeah. And Rick always said that he loved that.
Yeah, Union tour. I mean, it was good fun. I imagine there was probably some conflicts amongst personalities, I think. But I think the advantage Dad sort of had in that world is that Jon was there, so he was happy. He's got a history with Steve, and he likes Trevor, and he didn't have that sort of feeling of, "Oh, I wish I'd been on 90125." He didn't bother because he hadn't been on Relayer, he hadn't been on Drama, he didn't bother him that he wasn't on another Yes record, And I think the advantage that Dad has had is he had quite a successful solo career as well. So he ticked quite a few of the boxes, and so not being on one record wasn't the end of the world to him.
Did I read that one of these sold something like 14 million copies worldwide? Was it The Six Wives of Henry VIII or Journey to the Center of the Earth? One of those.
Yeah. I mean, ridiculous figures. I mean, if you look up the history of those two records, it's amazing because they almost got canned, in their early days, which is another whole story. But I just remember him on that tour and enjoying himself, and I think it was quite a nice feeling for him. He'd done ABWH, big tour, came back, did some solo shows, went off and did the Union tour. I mean, that's a good thing. Then it wasn't long after that they then did, I think they then broke up and then did Talk, and then shortly after Talk they went off and got back together again and did Keys to Ascension, which was another load of big shows. So I think it was probably a good time in his life. He was married to Nina, family was all getting on well. It was probably a nice period of time, I would have thought. We all get these little moments in our life, don't we? We sort of think of as a sort of little golden period. I think that was one of Dad's periods of his life where he was really enjoying himself and was playing very well. And I think we were just getting into that world again where people were able to like different types of music. There were more music magazines appearing that covered more of the genres rather than just two magazines that only covered the top 20 records and
whatever they like, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And, there was all these things starting up, phone lines where you could hear about music, or the very early days of the internet and things like that, and everything sort of starting to open up again. And it's odd to think about it now with such a nostalgia market and the ability to listen to anything at any time whenever you want to. In those days, it was a completely different thing. You only found about music by walking up to a secondhand record store and spending 2 hours just thumbing through records and reading liner notes and finding out, hey, that was the engineer that did the engineering on that record. I might like it because he probably does. It's that sort of stuff. It's an interesting world.
It is different now, but that's why we do our show. We want to remind people about what it was like growing up. How it used to be, if you heard a song on the radio, you just happened to be in the car at that moment on that station and it played. Now I've got Sirius and I've been sitting there for half an hour. I just go back in time. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, Flock of Seagulls. Yeah, I want to listen to that.
Yeah, it is. I do the same with my son. And it's nice to see a lot more people actually starting to get back into proper physical products, because that's the thing that I think. There was a period of time where I think we felt that it was all going to disappear and everything was just going to become in your phone. But I think the fact that physical media is coming back, and it does seem to be really starting to get a bit of a resurgence. People like that idea of something tangible that they hold and they own, because I think people, first thing with streaming, everyone went, oh, isn't it amazing? And then suddenly people realize that they pay this money each month, and then something that they like can suddenly be taken away from them, and they've got no right to it. How often have you been watching something on Netflix or something and gone, great, I'm at episode 37 of 90, and then suddenly it's pulled?
Yep.
And you go, oh, well, hang on, I still give you £10. Can I not watch that? Nope, sorry, it's gone. Whereas if you've got the DVD on your bookcase or the Blu-ray or the record or whatever,
that's right,
you've got it there. And I think people are starting to go back. I mean, even, I listen to things on Apple Music or whatever, but I don't just search around Apple Music. I go to my music collection and I look at my CDs and go, what do I fancy listening to? Oh, I quite fancy listening to that. And and then I go and find it.
Well, and plus with the physical copy too, you also get the photos, you get the cover art that you can appreciate and kind of flip through and see where the band was at that point in time. So I think that definitely adds to the experience of listening to the music.
Yeah, and also you think about it, how often, I mean, I'm going to go on my own experiences here, but I imagine some listeners are exactly the same. How often had you been at a party where you didn't really know many people, and you gravitate towards the CD collection or the bookcase, and you're starting to look to see what the host has got, and you sort of go, I've got that, right? And somebody will sidle up alongside you and go, I've got that one, and you go, I've got that one as well. You start a conversation, you find you've got similar music tastes, you make a connection, which can become a friendship, can become a mild acquaintance. If it's, sometimes it can, depending on who it is that's walked up next to you, it can become something more just through that interaction. You would never go into a party nowadays and saying, I'd love to talk to you about music. Give me your phone. You just wouldn't do that. And that's what physical media gives us as humans. It gives us that ability to have something tactile and a conversation starter that allows us to create a connection with somebody else. And I think that's, I talk to my son about it all the time. I just sort of say, look, go into the back room. There's a wall of CDs there. If you ever just want to go in, got a CD player in his car. Take 2 or 3 CDs. As long as they go back into the right cases, right? I don't mind. But just take something randomly, go and listen to it. And then if you like it, you'll discover something, and it's, I think that's really important.
It's always been my opinion that music is the most human of art forms, that connects people like nothing else. I mean, we may all like painting. We like to see Roger Dean stuff, and maybe you go to an exhibit of his, or, I've bought some of his stuff and I can have a few people look at it together, but it's not like putting 15,000 people at the summit to hear an evening of Yes Music Plus, right? I mean, at a sporting event, it kind of brings people together, but there are going to be people on either side. Someone's going to be upset at the end of the night. Whereas with the concert, it's just a communal experience to sing along the songs that you love, to watch these people play. It's like nothing else, as far as I'm concerned. Nothing's better at bringing people together than music.
Absolutely. And it transcends language as well, because it's melody, which everybody gets melody. I mean, I listen to some songs. I'm terrible at languages. I have no ability to do other languages. It's one of my things I've tried to sort, but I'm just rubbish at it. I cannot get it. But I listen to some music with people singing in different languages to my own, and I have no idea what they're singing about. They could be singing, Oliver, you're an idiot. But I'm listening to that, and you can hear, it's just amazing. A friend of mine years ago did I think it was a record on some sort of Middle Eastern folk tunes or something. I had no idea what they were talking about, but they were using authentic instruments and stuff. And I just listened to it, and it was just like, this is amazing. I had no idea what the language was. I had no idea about the instruments, but I could enjoy it. I could listen to it, learn something, enjoy it. And that's what music does. That's the advantage that music has over any other form of media, I think.
I agree. Look, Oliver, you've been super generous with your time. We've had a lot of fun talking to you. You can come back anytime to talk about anything you want to promote. I know you have a story about seeing David Bowie, so we might want to have you back on First Concert Memories sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yeah. I didn't get to go to backstage at that one either.
Oh, well. How old were you then?
I was about 18, I think.
Okay.
So it was probably shortly after. I think it was the Sound and Vision tour, which is probably about 1990. I think it was.
Oh yeah, that's right. That was his box set, Sound and Vision.
Yeah. It was the big greatest hits tour with Adrian Belew on guitar.
Oh wow, yeah. And then was it right after that he did Tin Machine, or was that right before?
Yeah, Tin Machine was before. Tin Machine was either side of the Sound and Vision tour. He did Tin Machine 1, then did that greatest hits tour, then came back and did Tin Machine 2, I think.
Because I think when he did Glass Spider, he was pretty unhappy. And it was Reeves Gabrels, his guitar player, is like, what are you doing these old songs? Like, I don't know, Reeves. I really don't. And that's why he formed Tin Machine, because he needed to do something more vibrant, more visceral, more than just ground control to make for the 50,000th time or whatever it is, because he was an artist and he did want to just get stuck doing the greatest hits, right?
Yeah. It was good. I mean, we can do this now if you want to do the second episode now.
I would love to. I do have to go get that 11-year-old at school here, though, so I hate to break this up. I've had a blast, Jackson. I don't know about you, but
absolutely, yeah,
Oliver, we can't thank you enough.
Yeah,
that was a pleasure. Absolutely,
really cool to hear a recount from somebody who is both a professional musician and a fan, just to get that perspective both ways.
Oh, that's cool. No, well, thank you for inviting me. I look forward to coming back.
Thank you.
Fun. Absolutely. And I will see you in Cincinnati in a couple of months, man. Really looking forward to it. Sounds great. Look forward to it.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All the best. So nice of Oliver Wakeman to join us, talk about seeing his dad Rick play on the big stage. For Oliver, the first time to see him on the big stage live. Talk a little bit about his tenure in Yes, and talk about the upcoming shows he's doing with Rick here in America in March. Now, point of reference, when I was saying to Oliver, hey, is Rick going to do anything from these albums? I was talking about The Six Wives of Henry VIII. I was talking about Journey to the Center of the Earth and Tales from King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, because those were big solo albums from him. And if you look at Rick's last few years of doing his solo tours, that's kind of what he concentrated on, was Henry VIII and King Arthur for the most part. But it's great to hear that he's going to be doing some Yes stuff. And I think it's a good idea for the American audience. But make sure you go to oliverwakeman.co.uk and click the links to get Mother's Ruin, which comes out March 13th. He's really revamped it and put stuff back in there that didn't make the final mix the first time. And definitely go see him and Rick live here in America. Plus, he'll be doing his solo band and doing music from the Yes album From a Page, which, goodness, I wish I could see. If I lived in the UK, I would find a way to see that. But I'm stateside now. There's not a whole lot I can do about it at the moment. But that doesn't mean you can't. So get out there and support Oliver, because he's very talented. And he's a good guy. You heard from the interview. Very relatable. And he's our age. So we went through a lot of stuff at the same time, albeit on different continents, and he had a little different access to the music than we did. But he's welcome back anytime, and as we mentioned, he did get to go see David Bowie. We've never done a David Bowie show on First Concert Memories, so maybe that's coming down the road. But we want to know, folks, what were the bands that turned you on? What were the shows that after you saw them live, you're like, wow, now I'm in for life. I'm a rock and roller for life. Or maybe even inspired you to go pick up an instrument. Let us know. It's uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. Let us know the bands that turned you on that you want to hear us talk about on First Concert Memories. And we need you to download and subscribe any place you get your podcast. Those downloads are the lifeblood of growing our show, attracting advertisers, and attracting more guests. But if you really want to help us out, please go give us a 5-star review. Really, anywhere is great, but Apple and Spotify are the big ones. It just means the world to us. It helps us find more rockers like you. And if you send it our way, we might just read it on an episode. Thanks as always to Pantheon Podcast for making us part of the family. And thanks to our sponsor, rarevinyl.com, where you can use the code UGLY to save 10% off one entire order. That's it for this month. We've got some great live shows coming up, and we can't wait to talk about them here on Ugly American Werewolf in London. And we're going to have some great guests on First Concert Memories to talk about what turned them on back in the day and why it's still significant to them now. So you're going to have to stay tuned. And please keep going to see live music. It's the only way we're going to keep rock alive.